Hey guys, so this is chapter 6, lesson 2. This is a short one. It kind of touches on things from lesson 1, but real briefly we want to go through who the leaders are at this time. And so we mentioned the dictators last time, the Axis powers. Benito Mussolini, his rise to power comes a little bit before Hitler. He was a role model for Hitler in some ways, although Hitler does end up surpassing him in power and just military strength. But Benito Mussolini is the one who's going to rise to power in Italy. He's using these fascist symbols as a way of calling back to the good old days of Italy, when Italy was strong, which would be when Italy was Rome, the Roman Empire. So that the fascist, or the fasces as a symbol, harkens back or makes people think of ancient Rome or the Roman Empire. And even like the salute, like the Nazi salute, where you see someone like holding their hand up like that, that was thought to be a Roman salute. So they're bringing these symbols in to remind people of the good old days. Even Hitler's doing the same thing, trying to remind people of the Holy Roman Empire back when Germany was stronger and before it had been humiliated with the Treaty of Versailles and the end of World War I. Adolf Hitler from Germany. The German flag at this time becomes the swastika, a symbol which would have been a peaceful symbol before Hitler took it, and is now seen as a symbol for hate. Hideki Tojo for Japan. And when you see the Japanese flag now, there's just a red sun, white flag. But at this time, they had aspirations to conquer the Pacific region, so China and the Philippines and even up to Australia. So they see themselves as spreading. So when you see those the rays coming off of the red sun, at that time that's the imperial flag of Japan when they're trying to spread. And they're actually kind of inspired by Teddy Roosevelt's Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. He said, Teddy Roosevelt said that America was the international police power, that they were responsible for the Western Hemisphere. Well, Japan is seen as their responsibility to manage the Pacific region. And so they're kind of using our model in a sense and then twisting it, and they're going to kind of dominate places like China in a very cruel way. But they're also trying to get resources. We have our resources in America. Japan is going to take over parts of the Pacific because they don't have resources on the island. If they want to industrialize, they need to get the raw materials in other places that we have naturally in the United States. So that's Hideki Tojo. I mentioned last lesson that the emperor is Emperor Hirohito, but he's more of a figurehead. He is the person that most Japanese are thinking of and are loyal to, so they take it as their loyalty is to the emperor. One of the tricks with getting Japan to surrender by the end of the war will be the Japanese are so loyal to the emperor as a religious figure that they don't want to give up, and many of them will be willing to die in support of him. So, but we'll get to that later on. So, those are the nut jobs, those three right there. That's the Axis powers. The Allied powers. It's going to start with France and Britain, but France is going to be taken out of the war early, and they'll end up fighting as an underground resistance, which is still very important. A lot of times they get dismissed or laughed at for surrendering, but they're still an important part of the war with the French underground resistance. But Great Britain is really keeping it alive, the resistance alive, by not giving in to what's called the Battle of Britain. Germany is never able to invade the island of Britain. Britain will end up being our launching point to take back the continent of Europe with D-Day. But Great Britain becomes our ally, and Great Britain eventually pulls in the Soviet Union, or Russia, with Joseph Stalin, largely because Joseph Stalin gets invaded by Hitler and the Germans. They have an alliance initially where Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, they're united together in what's called a non-aggression pact. And the two of them, Stalin and Hitler, are going to split Poland. So Stalin does an evil thing by invading Poland and giving Hitler kind of the cover to invade Poland as well. and he promises he won't attack Hitler. And Hitler promises the same thing, but never trust Hitler. Eventually, when Hitler realizes that he can't defeat Britain and he can't invade Britain, he's going to then turn on Russia and invade Russia, and it's a betrayal for Stalin, but it's going to force Stalin to eventually join up with the Allies. The Allies, Great Britain and the Soviet Union, and eventually America will join directly after Pearl Harbor, but before that, America is also lending supplies in what's called the Lend-Lease program. They're giving them weapons, loaning them weapons to help. So America does get involved, and eventually they'll get directly involved once Japan declares war, and then Germany declares war, Italy declares war, then America gets all in. Now these countries they're the Allied powers. They're often referred to as the Allied powers. On a test, I'll refer to them as Allied powers. But they're also called the United Nations. So the United Nations are all the countries that are together opposing Hitler and the Axis powers. Which is why at the end of the war, spoiler alert, the Axis powers lose. When people are thinking of the League of Nations and how badly the League of Nations failed, and they're thinking, well, what's this new United Nations? You might think, well, why would you try the same thing and just change the name? No one's going to be fooled by that. But the United Nations was known for being successful because the United Nations is what you called the resistance to the Axis powers, and they won. Spoiler alert, they win. There's also a little underneath FDR. So Franklin Roosevelt is the leader, the president for the United States. Winston Churchill is the prime minister for Great Britain, and Joseph Stalin is the leader for the Soviet Union, which at this point is a country mainly with Russia and some other satellite countries as well that will join become the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. Soviet Union, Russia, we might use those kind of interchangeably. They're going to become our enemy after the war is over and we start the Cold War. But during this war, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Soviet Union becomes Hitler's enemy, and so they become our friend. And we do support them with weapons, and then eventually directly we help. So those are the Allied powers. Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin. Spoiler alert again, Franklin Roosevelt is going to die shortly after he's elected to his fourth term. So not only does he have a third term, but a fourth term as well. No other president has gone beyond 2. Franklin Roosevelt went to 4. In his fourth term, towards the end of the war, he is going to die of a brain hemorrhage. And his vice president at the time is Harry Truman. And Harry Truman will become the president after Franklin Roosevelt. He's going to discover things like the Manhattan Project and the plan to make an atomic bomb. And then he's going to have the choice of whether or not to use it against Japan. So by the time Harry Truman is president, Germany will shortly after he becomes president, Germany will be defeated, and then he'll turn his attention exclusively to Japan and make a choice about using the atomic bombs. So those are our leaders, those guys right there. All right, that's lesson 2. Next lesson we'll talk about the events starting with the invasion of Poland and working up to the very end of the war, a few lessons after that. Okay, bye.